Viceministro, mil gracias por acompañarnos. La siguiente conferencia será en inglés, así que les recuerdo que los equipos de traducción simultánea están acá al fondo del salón, a mi mano derecha, para las personas que necesiten hacer uso de ellos. Muy bien, y para abordar el importante paso hacia una economía circular en el modelo empresarial, invitamos al escenario al señor Herman Huisman, quien nos acompañará en esta mañana.
If you can, yeah, next my slides. Yeah. Okay. Well, good morning, gentlemen and ladies, of course. If you want to get a translator, if you don't take one, you can regard this as a lesson in English. My slides will be in Spanish, so this will help you to understand my presentation, I hope. But unfortunately, I'm one of the few in this audience who doesn't speak Spanish. And I'm regretting that as much as you do, but can I start? So this is a presentation on the Netherlands being a circular hotspot, and I'm very happy to be invited to this event and even be a keynote speaker. So first I would like to give a short geography lesson on the Netherlands. It's a very tiny country, only 40,000 square kilometers, with 17 million inhabitants, high GDP, and as you see in the middle picture, when we have a flooding of our country, 2/3 of our country will be inundated, because we're a delta area, downstream of the Rhine and the Meuse, and so we had this continuous fight with the water, 2/3 of our country below sea level. So the cooperation is in our DNA. We have been having this fight against the water for many, many centuries. I'd like to further introduce the Netherlands, so not just as a country of water management, but also the Netherlands is fourth on the list of innovative countries. And Amsterdam, our capital city, was the capital of innovation in 2016. Despite we're a very small country, we're the second exporter of agricultural products. So it's, there's a high pressure on the environment. So that's the reason we're surrounded by industrialized area from Belgium, from Germany, and with the prevailing southeastern wind, we also benefit from the air pollution from the UK. So the pressure on the environment in the Netherlands was already very high for many years. So that's the reason that our environmental awareness was already there in the early 70s. This is a slide I always show just to give the different phases in waste management, which in the start it's really with health as a driver, public health as a driver. Waste had to be taken out of the cities and put outside because health is also a cause of diseases. It's even now in some countries, in Tanzania for instance, yearly they have an outbreak of cholera due to sanitation but also bad waste management. We had this event in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, in 1860. So public health was really the first driver in waste management. So waste was collected, focus on waste collection, and it was dumped outside of the cities. And after many, many years of this operation, we found out that these landfills were leaking, that the incinerators were exhausting dioxins. So there was a new driver of environmental protection, which was in the 70s, not just in the Netherlands, but also in the EU. The first EU framework directive was from 1975, regarding waste as a regional issue, as a global issue. So we did flue gas cleaning, leachate treatment, all those, but still a lot of waste was produced. So we had issues with a scarcity of waste facilities, and therefore we turned into a new policy era of integrated policies. In the early 90s, we introduced many different policy instruments like professionalizing of the sector, of the recycling, introducing extended producer responsibility, introducing landfill bans, landfill taxes, and so on. So about now we have everything what we can reach with a sectoral waste policy, we reached. We have about 1% of landfilling, more than 80%, 82% of recycling, and 17% of waste to energy. But if we want to move on, we have to do things differently. We have to be involved in production and in consumption. Otherwise, you can't reach higher targets. So this linear economy, which leads to excavating them, raw materials, produce products, use the products and discard products, leads to a dead end, a cul-de-sac. We moved already in this area of recycling economy with loopbacks and as I mentioned, of more than 80% of our waste is being recycled and hardly waste being landfilled, but still it's not enough. So the Dutch government came with a new policy in September last year that the Netherlands has to be circular in 2050 and be halfway in 2030. So this is quite a step we took, and it's not just a policy of our Minister of Environment, but also of our Ministry of Economic Affairs and our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it's a joint activity, it's a joint plan adopted by government, and now we're in the phase of implementation of this system. So this circular economy is not just about saving the resources and about environmental policy, but it's also about a new economy with options for a very competitive economy, creating new jobs, and at the same time less emissions, less use of water and less use of land. So it's really an economic policy. And already mentioned earlier, many of the elements of this circular economy are the same as with the Sustainable Development Goals. So I made some circles around the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and many of them you see there as highlighted. Actually, these are the same policies in place, the SDGs and the circular economy. So we're really in the phase now of setting up all the systems, and so we develop the vision, the ambitions, the strategy, and we have indicated the main sectors we're going to focus on. The interventions we have are being developed, and also after that we need to scale up. So the first step really is our strategies. And our strategic goals is first to optimize the high-value resource reuse of resources in existing material chains, for example, by design for reuse and design for recycling, and by industrial symbiosis process. The second strategy is a shift from fossil, scarce, and non-sustainable produced resources to renewable, abundant, and sustainably produced resources, for instance, a bio-based economy and CO2 utilization. And the third element is create new ways of production, design, and also on consumption and use. So creating new ways of producing and consuming, which radically reduce our resource use. So already mentioned by the Vice Minister of Environment, a share economy, a smart industry, and for instance for agriculture, which is a very important sector in the Netherlands, a precision agriculture. So these are the sectors we have chosen in the Netherlands to focus on. And these sectors are the biomass and food sector. As I mentioned already, the agriculture is a very strong sector in the Netherlands, so this is obviously the way, one of the first sectors to look at. Agriculture is also a source of environmental pollution. We import a lot of nutrients from Brazil, for instance, from the soya and tapioca from Thailand and so on for our cattle. So we have a lot of issues with the nutrients in our country. So we really have to look in the management of the nutrients. But also all the biomass which is produced, it could be a source of new products, a new economy. So you can produce PET bottles based on biomass. You can produce paints, you can produce pharmaceuticals, you can produce bags and so on, all based on biomass. So that's one of the very important sectors. Another sector, obviously, is plastics, for a good reason, to really focus on producing more sustainable plastics, more homogeneous plastics, and we already have a Green Deal on these topics. The manufacturing industry, Netherlands is not well known as a manufacturing industry. Maybe Germany is always called as a manufacturing industry, but still we have quite a lot of facilities there. They are using a lot of resources, they are using a lot of energy, so that's one of the reasons that they are also chosen. And of course the construction sector. C&D waste in many countries, like in the Netherlands, is more than 1/3 of the total waste production. And a lot of C&D waste, although we have very high recycling rates, is not really upcycled. It's used as foundation material, and so you can make a better use of those minerals. For instance, we have a project on concrete to recycle the concrete, recycle the cement even in the concrete, and using also concrete for building new materials. And the consumer sector. So these are the priority sectors. They are more or less the same as in Europe, but with a slightly different focus. And and these are the interventions of the government. So we have set up quite a lot of interventions already. So stimulating legislation and regulation, and also remove impediments in regulation, because many of the environmental regulations are based on still on the phase of environmental protection, and they can really slow down innovations and give too less room for new activities. So we set up a program, Smart Regulations, and we asked industries what kind of regulation really hinders you to move towards a circular economy. And they came up with quite a lot of themes, more than 160. So we already answered 80 of them, and before 2020, we will deal with the other 80. We are busy with targets, a new waste definition, with EPR systems. So now we have EPR for about 5-6 waste streams, but it will be extended as part of the circular economy. Eco-design, obviously a topic for the EU, because we're too small a country to make these eco-designs effective. So this is being done in European framework. Waste shipment regulation, byproducts, end-of-waste regulation. So these are important elements. But also making room in legislation, new possibilities instead of barriers, which requires efforts and a different mindset of lawmakers, implementation and enforcement. Another one is the one on smart market incentives. So for the circular procurement policy, CO2 pricing to stimulate renewables, but also the government can create markets for new products and business models. The government can be a launching customer with a high purchasing power, and the government can regulate the external cost in pricing products, for instance, via landfills tax. And for the funding, some of the funding can be so tweaking the existing funds towards a circular economy, bringing innovations to the market and make the funding open for new business models. So help the SMEs, help entrepreneurs to understand and speak the language of the financial institutions and vice versa. The next intervention is on the knowledge and innovation part. Stimulate resource and innovation, support and organize knowledge networks between companies and knowledge institutes, and link the knowledge sector to the private sector. Products, material information, and know where the risks lie, and national capital accounting. And of course the last one is also about international cooperation, cooperate and take the same. So EU policy, OECD policy, and so yesterday I was in an event in Panama on circular economy, and so it's really something which is it's growing. So about green deals, we set up this system of green deals already a few years ago, and Europe took over those green deals and call it innovation deals. So it's a way to boost innovation in a society. It's scaling up and inspiring, improving framework conditions, and creating new networks. The Green Deals are a voluntary agreement of private and public with realistic and clean targets and also clear actions. The government strengthens these networks and remove barriers in legislation and support these markets for innovation and new business models. And already we have more than 200 green deals, and in these green deals already more than 1,100 companies and knowledge institutes are participating on many different topics. And as you can see there, some examples are mentioned. One of the first green deals was the one on phosphates, recovering the phosphate from sewage sludge. Nowadays, we're even collecting the cellulose from sewage treatment facilities, the papers you use in the sewage. Also the Green Deal I already mentioned on the concrete, and so there are many on, for instance, also the slags of waste to energy plants. nowadays you can't use them as a foundation material without in very strict circumstances. But there's a lot of technology now to clean up the slags to make them available as a normal building material. And so all the knowledge institute, universities, but also the waste energy plants owners, they participate in this system. So it's really a bottom-up process with the participation and really the input from from companies. So I mentioned these. I mentioned the different sectors which have been chosen, and the next step is that for all these 5 sectors, transition agendas will be set up, and they have to be finalized in September, October from this year, and will be discussed in Parliament in December. So for all these 5 sectors, we set up an action agenda which lists innovation projects that could be implemented on the short term but also on the long term. A knowledge agenda listing all the information and research questions that need to be answered to enable this transition. A social agenda which also describes the business model that needs to be developed but also the impact on the labor market. And an investment agenda, listing the financial impediments that should be removed. And so all these agendas will be finalized in October and will be discussed in our Parliament. So we're now in what we call the first phase of accelerating this circular economy process, and this now in the phase of the pre-development, and the real takeoff should take place in the 20s, and with an acceleration phase in this period from 2020 to 2050. So this is the way we have set up our policies nowadays, and so it's not just a policy from the government, but it's also a very active participation of the industry. So your counterpart from Andy in the Netherlands, the VNO-NCW, is also very active in all these areas, and the Association of Farmers and all these. They take part in these transition agendas. So it's a ongoing process, and we hope to be able to report more successes in the future. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope it gives you some inspiration for your work in Colombia. Thank you very much.